Hi, welcome to Cisco CCNA in 60 days. The book's on Amazon. It's version 4 if you want to grab a copy. It matches this course, but it's got a lot more stuff in it, mini labs and other goodies. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we've got a lot of full courses, career advice, and obviously this entire course. It's day 45 and we're going to cover switch security. So there's quite a few things like preventing telnet access and locking the switch down as much as we can, and also port security, which is tested in the exam. As always, read the cram guide that was on day 0 and day 1. Watch the videos, do the labs, take the online exam. The link is on day 0 and 1. Do some subnetting and the 101 labs book. So switch security, and then there's a lab you can follow along. Should work on packet tracer. I think the commands are mostly supported for this lab. There's some books that will help you. 101 Labs IP Subnetting, 0 to Guru book that I wrote, and 101 Labs Cisco CCNA. So that's all for today. Enjoy the lessons. I'll see you tomorrow. Switch security. So I've upgraded the previous presentation on this particular subject to reflect changes in the new CCNA exam, the ICND1. A lot more emphasis on securing switch ports, whereas previously you needed to understand what it was and recognise the commands, but now you do need to understand it in a lot greater depth. So without further ado, we'll cover some basic switch security procedures. Obviously, you don't want anyone to be able to telnet into the switch. If you are permitting telnet into the switch or remote access into the switch, what you might want to do is just configure or allow SSH inputs. So this encrypts all the traffic coming over the remote connection to your switch. So rather than the normal clear text telnet connection, which can easily be sniffed, if you add to the VTY lines transport input SSH, obviously line VTY 0 space, and then whatever the highest number is you have available, you can type question mark to see what it is, and then transport input SSH. Then obviously the only way to connect remotely to the switch to manage it is through SSH. Obviously an enable secret password. Enable secret password uses level 5, which you can see on the bottom, MD5 level encryption. So it's a lot harder to crack than just a normal enable password. If you just do set an enable password, you can see at the bottom when somebody does a show run, they can see it in clear text. You can add the service password -encryption command, which will encrypt all of the standard global passwords on your router. However, it's quite a weak reversible password. It's a level 7, which is quite weak. Switch port security. So a big topic here now. You can actually protect the switch, and you generally use switch port security to protect the switch ports. Switch port security checks MAC addresses, obviously, because it's a layer 2 switch. You can limit the number of MAC addresses permitted per port on the switch also, and you can dynamically secure your ports with minimal configuration on your part. Now you can secure trunk or access ports. There's some confusion when you read various boards saying you can't use port security on trunk ports. You can do. It isn't done very often. It does depend on which model switch you're using and which level of iOS you're using. Generally speaking, you'll set a switch port security on a trunk port that is connected to a voice VLAN. You've got voice and data running, so you need more than two VLANs running off the same port. So here's a diagram showing you the theory behind switch port security. You can see 3 of the ports have MAC addresses configured to be permitted through those ports. Port 4, the allowed MAC is ended in 0004. However, a device with a different MAC address has tried to send traffic over the port and it's been blocked. So one of the purposes of switch port security is to prevent CAN table overflow attacks. It's quite easy to download software that will start a CAN table overflow attack, and as you know, the CAN table on your switch basically is a mapping of which MAC address is attached to which port. But there's only so much memory on switches, so this particular hacking program sends loads and loads of MAC addresses randomly generated through your port. It overloads the memory, and what it does is turn your switch effectively into a hub, in which case it just broadcasts all frames that come through. Another reason why we use port security is MAC spoofing. This is where somebody tries to masquerade as another host on the network in order to capture the traffic that has been sent to that host. So you can see we've got 4 hosts here on the diagram. Each one has got a MAC address 1234 or ending in 1234 allocated to fast Ethernet 1234. So that's all working fine. One of the hosts now has been compromised. You can see fast Ethernet 0/1 has got 2 MAC addresses associated with it. So what it's doing is trying to steal the data that was intended to go to fast Ethernet port 0/2. So that's MAC spoofing. Got a few options for configuring port security. We can have static secure, in which case you configure which MAC address is permitted through the port. You can dynamically learn which MAC address is connected. So you can permit, say for example, the first learned MAC address to be permitted and no others, or a number specified by you. Or you can have what's known as sticky secure, which is a mixture of both. When it detects a violation, a port can do a few things. It can go into protect mode, shutdown mode, which is the default. You don't need to configure anything if you just want it to be a shutdown mode, or restrict. Now you do need to know what each one does, what the action of each one does, what happens to traffic when there's a violation, and if there's a syslog message sent and a SNMP trap. So make sure you're familiar with all of the outputs and options in this particular table, because you could well be tested on this in the exam. And here's the command. I've issued a switch port mode access. I've hard set it to access. You can't leave it as dynamic. Added switch port security. I've put SW for short, and then switch port security violation, and you can see the 3 modes I can choose from. As I said, you can configure port security on a trunk, and here's a brief configuration example. Show commands you need to be familiar with. Show port-security. Some of these commands won't work on Packet Tracer very well, by the way. They're not accepted. Show port security, and then the interface name. It will show you the status, the port security if it's enabled, the status, the violation mode is restrict, protect, or shut down, how many MAC addresses are allowed, and how many have come through. There's aging type as well, which I don't think we need to worry about for the CCNA. Configuration example here. I've configured port security, and I've allowed a maximum of 2 MAC addresses. So at any given time, there can only be 2 MAC addresses permitted through that port. If you type show port-security address, you can see which MAC addresses have come in. Sticky addresses are MAC addresses that come through your port, but then they're added to the running config of your switch, and they're there for the amount of time that the switch is up. Obviously, if you reload the switch, then you'll lose those addresses. I've added switch port security maximum 10. So 10 MAC addresses are allowed through this interface, and after that, well, all 10 then the MAC addresses are remembered. The MAC addresses are put into the running config, and no more MAC addresses will be permitted. I've issued a show running config for that interface. At the moment, we've got 5 MAC addresses that have come through, so we're allowed another 5. I just wanted to illustrate the point that you can see it in the running config.
I've added a violation action as well here to the final config. Show logging, you'll get logging output to your syslog server or your console session, depending on how you're connected, for restrict and shutdown modes. Protecting the switch ports, I've already covered these commands. Here's just an example of a config. I've got a PC connecting to a switch and a switch port, and I've hard set the MAC address that's allowed, so only that MAC address will be permitted through that port. I've allowed a static MAC address, which is a config I've already covered earlier actually, but then I've issued the show port security interface fast Ethernet 0/1, and you can see the last source address. There's a VLAN number on the end appended to that also, whichever VLAN it's connected to. Now if a switch port does go down because of the wrong MAC address, you obviously need to reconnect the correct MAC address, and then you need to no shut the interface because it will be administratively down. In Packet Tracer, or obviously if you've got live equipment, you can connect a PC to a switch with port security on. In this particular example, I've connected a PC with an incorrect MAC address. I've changed the MAC address in Packet Tracer. I can see the port status now is shut down, and you can see the source of the violation. Moving on to CDP now, you need to understand the security implications of CDP. I think we have some labs in other days. You need to be able to disable CDP on the router. If you want to disable it entirely on the router or switch, it's no CDP run. If you just want to turn it off a specific interface for whatever reason, the command is no CDP enable, so please type those commands out. Banner message, it doesn't really add security, but it tells people that they should or shouldn't be on a particular device. And here's the configuration for a banner message of the day. And you can see I've added an equal sign there, which is the delimiting character. That tells the router when you press that command or that key again, you finish with your banner message. And here's me connecting to the switch, and you can see the banner message has come up. VTP password, again, you should be doing this on your trunking labs. Adding a VT password will secure your VTP domain and updates. You can protect the trunk links on your switch to designate which VLANs are allowed through. Strongly recommend you also try this on switches, either on Packet Tracer or your own live switches. Switch port mode trunk, and then decide which VLANs you want to allow through. Switch port trunk allowed VLAN, and you can just have one, or you can have a range separated with a dash. If you wanted to append some on the end, you can type a comma after the 9, for example, 5-9, comma, and then you could put 11 if you wanted to add 11 and miss off 10. And obviously updating the iOS. The latest iOS has bug fixes, and other security vulnerabilities are addressed.
Let's look at some basic switch security. So we've got a PC connected to a switch on one of our switch ports, and what we want to do is configure a MAC address port security on our switch to permit only this intended MAC address through. There's lots of different configurations. You can permit the first MAC address learned on this switch interface, which would be a sticky MAC address known as. You can permit certain fixed MAC addresses and then a number of other MAC addresses. It really just depends on what it is you want to achieve, obviously. So for our switch, a couple of things about switch port security. You can only configure it on a switch access interface. So if we go into our switch here, enable, I've got the host plugged into fast Ethernet 0/1. I'm pretty sure. So conft, so interface fast 0/1. If I do the command switch port, now if I type question mark, the command is port-security that I'm looking for. Now if I press enter, it says command rejected, fast Ethernet is a dynamic port, so we need to hard set this as a access port. Switch port mode, if I type question mark here, in fact you can see we've got 3 to choose from, and access is the one we want. Now I'm going to hit the up arrow to see if that'll save me some time. Switch port, port-security. There, so it's turning on port security, but it hasn't said what we want to do with this port security. It doesn't magically configure the whole thing for you. If I type the up arrow again and type question mark, and you'll see the permutations, maximum number of MAC addresses. Violation action is what you want the switch port to do. By default it'll shut the port down, but it can also inform the network administrator, or it can restrict the traffic going across through this interface to only the permitted MAC addresses. So we want to configure a specific MAC address here. MAC address. The MAC address we're going to put in is from our host here. Now I'm not sure if this will let us paste it into our config, but it ends 767E. Paste. Okay, let's see if it accepts that. Yeah, that's worked. So exit. So we could do a show port security, and then you can type the interface. So it's fast 0/1. Show port security. Oh, okay. Interface fast 0/1. Okay, port security is enabled. The port status is secure up. The interface is shut down. Sorry, the violation action is shut down, which is what will happen if disallowed traffic comes through the interface. So the next thing to do is to send some traffic through. In fact, if we just change, this should work if we just change the MAC address on the PC here. You can do this by connecting a router to a switch, or you may physically be able to change the MAC address. Okay, what I had to do is actually add an IP address on. I thought it might send some layer 2 traffic through, but added an IP address onto this. It should have been E, but I've changed it from its original E to F. Now if we go back to the switch, you can see it's shut the interface down. And if we do a show port security fast Ethernet 0/1, there you go. It's been set into secure shutdown. Now this interface won't come back up again now. It won't come back up again until you as the administrator go in and no shut this interface. And if we can do the show port security, it will show the original command. It should end 767E is the permitted MAC address. The one that's come through is 767F. So it's a real simple test for you to do. You can try all the other permutations, permit certain static MAC addresses, sticky MAC address, and a certain number of hosts. But I just wanted to demonstrate the easy way of configuring the commands.